good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our Brighton and Hove Libraries Live author event with Janet Skeslien Charles. My name's Nora, and I'm part of the community engagement team at Brighton and Hove Libraries. And it's lovely that you've joined us this evening, so thank you for that. And I'm sure we're going to have a great evening. Talking to Janet and hearing about her latest book, The Paris Library, which was published by John Murray Press. So Janet is an award-winning author of Moonlight in Odessa, and she first became interested in the subject of her second novel when she heard about the true story of the librarians who stood up to the Nazis by keeping the library open, customers and books safe, and they hand-delivered books to people who were banned from using the library. They were termed undesirable. So, Janet, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Nora. I'm delighted to be here tonight with you.
Brilliant, thank you. So, first of all, I know you spend your time between Montana, where you grew up, and Paris. So, where are you this evening?
Well, I haven't been to Montana since 2020, maybe even a little earlier than that, because of COVID. So I've been in Paris since March of 2020.
Right, okay. And how is it in Paris at the moment? Is it cold?
Well, we did have a cold spell. It warmed up a little bit. We have a 6 p.m. curfew, and kids are still in school. Most of the cafes and restaurants are closed, but you can, for a few of them, you can have takeout at noon. It's a little grim. Luckily, we still have our bookshops open, and so that's really wonderful to go and be able to choose books and say hello to the booksellers.
Wow, that's lovely. Yeah, a little bit different here, I'm afraid. We're more or less closed down. No shops open, no bookshops open, and certainly none of our libraries in Brighton and Hove at the moment, unfortunately. Anyway, it's lovely you can join us this evening. And I was just wondering, Janet, for those who haven't had the opportunity to read the Paris Library, would you be able to tell us a little bit about it? And possibly read an extract from it. And then also tell us what took you to Paris in the first place.
Well, I grew up next to a war bride I live in Shelby, Montana. It was population 2000 when I was growing up. And a few doors down, my family lived next door to a war bride, and she was originally from Normandy, not far from the D-Day beaches. And so I just was very inspired growing up next to her, listening to her speak French, listening to her speak English with that beautiful lilting French accent of hers. She just made words sound so beautiful. And that really gave me my desire to study French and to come to France as an exchange student as a teen, and then later on get a job here. So I first came to France as a teaching assistant, and so I worked in a local high school with teenagers, and then I eventually got a job at the American Library in Paris as the programs manager. And that's when I heard about the story of the library during World War II, when these incredible librarians stood up to the Nazis in order to hand deliver books to Jewish readers. And I was just really fascinated in particular with the director of the library, Dorothy Reeder. I think that's a wonderful name for a librarian, first of all, Dorothy Reeder. And she just was so elegant and so intelligent. And she came to Paris on her own in 1929. And she worked her way up from the periodical section to becoming the director of the library in 1936. She did so much for so many people. And I read a report of hers that was marked confidential. She wrote it during the occupation, and it was 15 pages long. And when I read that report, I knew the book was a novel. I knew I had to write her story.
So, were you aware of the backstory of the American Library, or did you just discover it because you happened to get a job there and become the program manager?
I came to Paris in 2000, and I was a member of the library. I volunteered at the library, but it wasn't until I worked there that I heard the story from two colleagues and started to get interested. And I have to say, every day, more and more librarians and archivists are scanning pages and making them available to scholars online. So it doesn't matter where you live, you can research just about anything today. So I feel very lucky that the American Library Association had scanned the documents so that I could look at them and really be able to do research from the privacy of my own home. That was really lucky. Technology really did help that.
Okay. And is it a public library, or do you have to apply to join it, or?
It's a private library. It does not receive any federal funding from the United States or any funding from France.
Okay.
So the library is funded by its members. I think there are about 4,000 members. 22% are French. Membership is 60 different nationalities. So it's very, very international.
Great. So Janet, would you like to read us an extract, please?
Yes, yes. Well, so this is my main character, Odile. It starts in Paris in February 1939. Numbers floated round my head like stars. 823. The numbers were a key to my new life. Constellations of hope. 841. In my bedroom late at night, in the morning on the way to get croissants, series after series, 810, 840, 890 formed in front of my eyes. They represented freedom, the future. Along with these numbers, I'd studied the history of libraries, going all the way back to the 1500s. In England, while Henry VIII was busy chopping off his wives' heads, our King Francois was modernizing his library, which he opened to scholars. Now, at the desk in my bedroom, I prepared for my job interview at the American Library, reviewing my notes one last time. Founded in 1920, the first in Paris to let the public into the stacks, subscribers from more than 30 countries, 1/4 of them from France. I held fast to these facts and figures, hoping they'd make me appear qualified to the directress. I strode from my family's apartment on the sooty Rue de Rome, across from the Saint-Lazare train station, where locomotives coughed up smoke. The wind whipped my hair, and I tucked tendrils under my tam hat. In the distance, I could see the ebony dome of St. Augustine Church. Religion, 200. Old Testament, 221. And the New Testament? I waited, but the number wouldn't come. I was so nervous that I forgot simple facts. I drew my notebook from my purse. Ah, yes, 225. I knew that. My favorite part of library school had been the Dewey Decimal System. Conceived in 1873 by the American librarian Melville Dewey, it used 10 classes to organize library books on shelves based on subject. There was a number for everything, allowing any reader to find any book in any library. For example, Mama took pride in her 648, housekeeping. Papa wouldn't admit it, but he really did enjoy 785, chamber music. My twin brother was more of a 636.8 person, while I preferred 637.7, cats and dogs respectively. I arrived on the Grand Boulevard, where in the space of a block, the city shrugged off her working class mantle and donned a mink coat. The coarse smell of coal dissipated, replaced by the honeyed jasmine of joy, worn by women delighting in the window display of Nina Ricci's dresses and Krisloff's green leather gloves. Farther along, I wound around musicians exiting the shop that sold wrinkled sheet music, past the Baroque building with the blue door, and turned a corner onto a narrow side street. I knew the way by heart. I loved Paris, a city with secrets. Like book covers, some leather, some cloth, each Parisian door led to an unexpected world. A courtyard could contain a knot of bicycles or a plump concierge armed with a broom. In the case of the library, the massive wooden door opened to a secret garden. Bordered by petunias on one side, lawn on the other, the white pebbled path led to a brick and stone mansion. I crossed the threshold. Beneath the French and American flags flittering side by side, and hung my jacket on the rickety coat rack. Breathing in the best smell of the world, a melange of the mossy scent of musty books and crisp newspaper pages, I felt as if I'd come home.
That's lovely. Thank you, Janet. That's really great description of the library, the garden, the smells and everything. I think if you're a library lover, you can recognize those telltale signs, can't you? Um, and from that extract, there's a lot of reference in the book to the Dewey system, and Odile quite often quotes books and book titles. And I mean, did you have all that knowledge at your fingertips? Are you absolutely, you know, you must be an expert in the Dewey system, but also, did you have somebody to help you to make sure what you were saying was correct, like a researcher? And you know, how did you come about? Because there is a lot of that in the novel, which is
Yes,
brilliant.
yes, there is. Well, for all of the book quotes, they are just my favorite books. They're just my
Okay.
favorite books. So I really wanted to shine a light on some authors that people might not necessarily know. For example, Dorothy Whipple was a forgotten author. She's now published by Persephone Press there in England, and I love their books. I wanted to be published by them, but they only took dead authors, and I wasn't willing to go to those extremes. So I'm very happy to be with Two Roads, still alive, published. So yeah, so the books are really some of my favorites, and maybe some books that we might not know. I'm very fortunate because my former colleague Simone Gallo, who is from Italy and has worked at the American Library in Paris since the 1970s, since the Nixon administration, looked through all of my numbers twice. And so he knows everything, and so I knew I was in good hands with him.
Brilliant, great. Yeah, so there were a number of really strong female characters in the book, and we do see the story of the book unfold through mainly Odile's eyes. So how did you choose her to tell the story?
Well, you know, I really love the story of Dorothy Reader and all of her colleagues at the library, but it was very hard for me to put words in real people's mouths, and I was
Yeah.
so afraid of making a mistake, and I didn't want her saying things that she didn't say or doing things she didn't do. So what I have in the book is her things that she wrote or things that were like actual things that she said. So I feel a bit more confident that way. So I needed a fictional character to have more freedom, so that I wasn't stopped by the reverence that I felt for Dorothy Reader and Boris and all of the colleagues at the library.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So one of the other female characters who was actually a favourite of mine was Lily, who is a teenage girl and lives in Montana, and yeah, she's just finding her feet, isn't she? And she doesn't feel like she fits in, and I think a lot of us could identify with her. And Odile very much takes her under her wing, doesn't she? But she was my favorite character. But I did wonder if she was based on you.
I think what's based on Lily, what's based on me is that desire to get out, and that feeling that bigger is better when in fact it's just bigger. But when you're a youngster and you live in a small town and you just want those opportunities. I can remember a cousin of mine who went to a different school, and she could take 4 years of German or Spanish or French when I had 2 years of French. So you just want those opportunities, but you don't realize how lucky you are to have the close attention from your teachers because of the smaller classes, and people know you and take care of you and look out for you. At the time, you don't really realize that. So yes, and my parents are here tonight, so I'm so glad that they're here with us. And I think they would testify that I don't have much in common with Lily except for that original desire to get out of town. But now
Yeah.
I'm just dying to get back to town. So isn't that
Yeah.
something?
Yeah, I mean, I very much identified with Lily's circumstances, and I think a lot of people would. But yeah, great. You were going to read an extract, I think.
Yes, let's
You.
we read Odile. It would be nice to read Lily too. What I really
Great.
tried to do in the book was to find parallels within the story, and so the sections with Odile in 1939, they start really with a tense situation in Europe where no one knows what's going to happen, and People, especially Odile's brother, is very concerned with the future. They've got an eye on what's going on with Germany and the former Czechoslovakia. And so there's a lot of tension and nervousness there. And it was the same really in Montana in 1983, where we start with in Freud, Montana, with Lily. It's the Cold War, and no one really knows what's going to happen. We have all of these missiles planted across the plains like potatoes. And so we have the same feelings of uncertainty in the world in these two sections. But here we are in Freud, Montana. Freud means froid, cold in France. And I found out about this town because my neighbors in Shelby are from Freud, Montana. But Lily is watching Odile here, an older Odile. Her name was Mrs. Gustafson, and she lived next door. Behind her back, folks called her the war bride, but she didn't look like a bride to me. First of all, she never wore white, and she was old, way older than my parents. Everyone knows a bride needs a groom, but her husband was long dead. Though she spoke 2 languages fluently, for the most part, she didn't talk to anyone. She'd lived here since 1945, but would always be considered the woman who came from somewhere else. She was the only war bride in Freud, much like Dr. Stanfield was the only doctor. I sometimes peeked into her living room, where her tables and chairs were foreign, dainty like dollhouse furniture with sculpted walnut legs. I snooped in her mailbox, where letters came from as far away as Chicago and were addressed to Madame Odile Gustafson. Compared to the names I knew, like Tricia and Tiffany, Odile seemed exotic. Folks said she came from France. Wanting to know more about her, I studied the encyclopedia entries on Paris. I discovered gray gargoyles of Notre Dame and Napoleon's Arch of Triumph. Yet nothing I read could answer my question. What made Mrs. Gustafson so different? She wasn't like the other ladies in Freud. They were plump like wrens, and their lumpy sweaters and boring shoes came in downy grays. The other ladies wore curlers to the grocery store, but Mrs. Gustafson donned her Sunday best, a pleated skirt and high heels, just to take out the trash. A red belt showed off her waist, always. She wore bright lipstick, even in church. That one certainly thinks highly of herself, the other lady said as she strode to her pew near the front, eyes hidden by her cloche hat. No one else wore a hat. And most parishioners sat in the back, not wanting to call themselves to God's attention, or the priests. There we go.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you.
So we've talked about Odile and we've talked a little bit about Lily. So the other character I'd like to touch on is Margaret. And if you could describe a little bit to the audience about Margaret. And I was just wondering if there was a lot of documentation about what happened to women in a similar situation to Margaret when you were researching the novel at all.
Well, if you look at the first page of the novel, you'll see a photo of the American Library in Paris. And in that photo, there's a woman in white, and she has a hat on, and the wide brim of the hat is hiding her expression. And so that was my inspiration for the character Margaret. Margaret is English, and she comes to Paris with very high expectations, like a lot of people do, where we think it's going to be very romantic and things are going to be wonderful. And we think of maybe the wonderful food, the wonderful shops, the wonderful perfume, the wonderful champagne. And Margaret finds herself to feel very lonely, and she finds it very hard to make friends. She doesn't speak French, and so she becomes mute. And so she goes to the library, and the library really saves Margaret. She wasn't much of a reader before she went to the library, but she starts volunteering at the library and really becomes an integral part of the library. And I think I have a sweet spot for Margaret. She's my favorite character. I relate to Margaret a lot, and she was really one of my favorite. Something dramatic does happen to Margaret in the book, and I read a lot. I saw a lot of photos. There are several documentaries, and the documentaries were done in about 2000. I watched them.
Okay.
in the library, France's National Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale, because that's where all the books and documentaries are. By law, they have to be sent a copy, so you can literally find everything there. And what I noted in the documentary was that the women would not turn their faces to the camera. They were still so upset and ashamed by what happened to them that they would not face the camera or give their full names. So it's something that happened quite a lot. There was the museum. There was a big museum at the Quai Branly Museum, and it was an exhibition about hair in general, but it had a large section on this as well. So yes, it's documented. People talk about it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think reading it did really make you think, you know, what would you have done in those circumstances? You really push us to kind of understand other people's response to certain situations and not to be judgmental, and to kind of, you know, try to have empathy and understanding, which I think comes across really well in the book.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you say that. Yes, I think everyone in the book is in a really tough situation. They're really in tough situations, and we don't know what we would do in those. We don't know what we would do in those situations. So it's very, very challenging. Margaret did what she thought was best.
Yeah, yeah. Right, so I have a quote here that says, "The Paris Library is a tribute to the importance of libraries and the transformative power of reading." So Janet, what influence and impact have libraries had on you? And at what age were you aware of libraries?
Well, I was aware of libraries from a very early age because my grandmother never learned to drive. And so my mother took her 2 places every week, to the grocery store and to the library. And
Great.
from these trips, I understood that books were just as nourishing as food. And I loved going into the library. I still go into the library looking at the library cards in the backs of books, hoping to see if my grandmother has checked it out. And if she had, I check it out as well. I think what's interesting about our library in Shelby is there's a local prison nearby. And so these people are completely cut off from the world, but the library has exhibits of their artwork. And so it's a way for these prisoners to still contribute to the community and be seen. And so I think the library is very vital in Shelby, Montana, where I'm from. It's a really wonderful place. I love walking in there.
So in the book as well, it becomes very clear very quickly that the American Library in Paris is a sanctuary for a lot of those people, which is the same as you're talking about now. And yeah, a lot of people do come to a library to feel safe and to be welcomed and to have a place just to, yeah, not feel threatened or to be part of something, as well as them widening their thoughts about the world, or an educational library. Yeah. So as a writer, do you have a certain routine yourself in terms of how you write? And if we weren't in lockdown, where would you like to write? Where do you set yourself up to write?
Well, I do write at home in my office. I try to write my office. These last few weeks with the book coming out have been kind of busy, so I haven't been writing as much as I usually do, or I've been writing smaller pieces about the book for newspapers and essays and things like that. So no, this is where, I mean, you can see behind me, I've got my books. I'm happy here. I used to write in cafes quite a lot, but there are a lot of flat screen TVs now. And so there's a lot of 24-hour news, or, you know, it's very loud because of either music or television. So I don't write in cafes like I used to because of that.
And do you kind of have your breakfast and then go to work kind of thing, or
I go to work and then I have my breakfast. I just get up and go, because if I don't, then I don't. But the
Great.
commute is short. I did a lot of research at the National Library, and that's a library that's just across the river from me, so I can walk there, and it's very practical. There are two levels of the library. There's maybe a library more for universities or general, university students or general use, and then there's the research library, which is in the sub-basement. And it's huge, but it's a sub-basement, so there's nothing to look at. There are no windows. You just go there and you get your work done. Until recently, there wasn't Wi-Fi, so there wasn't much in the way of distractions. Yeah. So I did a lot of my research for the book there, looking at things like the Paris edition of the New York Herald Tribune from 1939 to 1940, looking at old back issues of Library Journal, because I wanted to know what libraries were like in 1939, 1940, so I could really talk about the issues that librarians were facing at that time. For example, I found articles about patrons being worried about the transmission of germs through books even back then. And
That's interesting.
I know the library, the American Library in Paris, confines their books for 2 weeks before they put if a book has gone out, when the book comes back, it goes into the reading room, which is now the confinement room, and the books stay there for 2 weeks before they go back on the shelf. I also saw that the librarians at the time were worried about customer service, and so they went to department stores to get tips on how to better welcome their patrons. So yes, a lot of the research was actually quite a bit of fun, and I probably did a little too much, but it was very interesting.
Well, it sounds very like our library service at the moment in terms of quarantining books and yeah, like being meeters and greeters like you would be in a shop. Or yeah, it has changed in many ways, but it sounds like the foundations are still the same, definitely, in terms of customer service. And yeah. So you say you're writing short extracts and things. I'm sure you're not working on another book at the moment, are you? On a new
I am working in research on another book, but I don't like to talk about my
No,
research.
that's fine. Well, that's exciting. We'll be looking out for that, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing with us what you're reading for pleasure at the moment?
Reading for pleasure right now? I just got these two books. I don't know if you can see it. This is called The Paris Librarian. And it's by Mark Pryor, and it's a mystery. And it really scared me because when I saw the title, I thought perhaps he had published my book about Dorothy Reader 5 years before me. So I was really, really worried, and I also would not let myself read it until my own book was published, because I didn't want to be influenced. So I finally got to read Mark's book and really enjoyed it. I just finished a book called Lana's War by my same publisher in the US, and it takes place on the Riviera, and it was just really nice to be in the south of France with the sun, and the markets were still open, and it was a World War II story as well, and very sad from that point of view. But I did enjoy the change of pace, leaving Paris, at least in my mind. And
yeah. That sounds nice. It is a way to travel, isn't it? Reading a book helps. Yeah. Do you miss anything about Montana? And if you do, what do you miss?
Well, of course, I miss my friends and family from Montana a great deal, and I'm very grateful for Zoom and the other modes of communication right now. I miss the space. I miss the quiet. I miss being able to hold out my hands like this and not touch 20 people like you do in Paris when you're walking down the street. I miss the smell of clover. It always smells so good in Montana.
Okay.
It's just beautiful. The countryside is very beautiful. And the people are really lovely. So yes, there's a lot to miss.
Great. And what's the best thing about living in Paris?
Well, I love the bookstores in Paris. I think there's really a rich cultural life in Paris, and a real love of books. I just read a statistic from France Info, which I think is like the BBC in France, and they said that there are 7,000 publishers, and they bring out 200 books a day in France, which I just thought was
Wow.
incredible.
Yeah. Amazing. So my final question to you before we go to the audience's questions is, have you had an offer of making the Paris Library into a film or Netflix series? Because I think it would really do well.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. I think so too. The librarians are just absolutely wonderful. No, Hollywood has not called, so I'm really sorry about that. But
I think it'll happen.
oh, thank you. I hope so. That would be lovely.
Great. Okay, so Carly, could you read out some of the questions from our audience this evening, please?
Yes, Janet, we had one question about your next novel, but you've already answered that. And then we have another question from Alison. If you had only one more day left in Paris, how would you spend it?
That's such an interesting question. Well, normally I would just go sit and have a nice coffee and just sit on the sidewalk and enjoy watching people go by, or take a walk in the Luxembourg Garden and enjoy the flowers and just the beautiful trees. But the cafes are closed, so maybe I'd go to a pret-a-manger and to the local Pret, which is not too far from the Luxembourg Garden, and just have my coffee from there and take it to the garden. That's what I do.
Sounds lovely. And then our second question, which is our final question, unless we have any more. Have you always been a writer, or have you tried any other jobs? And that's from Julie O'Neill.
Well, I have a degree in teaching, and I've been a teacher for 25 years. I think I've always been a writer. I started writing when I was 12. I had notebooks, just filled up tons and tons and tons of notebooks. So always observing people, always thinking about things, always making up stories, always writing poems. But at the same time, I don't know that I knew how to be a writer or how to be an author, because when I grew up, you couldn't just Google how to publish your book or how to become an author, which you can do now. And Google will give you some pretty good advice. So, but I do love teaching. I love the optimism of my students. I love sharing my favorite books with them and my favorite poems with them. So I think that the two jobs go really well together, because when I'm finished teaching for the day, I'm very happy to go back to my book. And when I don't know what to do with my plot, I'm always happy to go talk to my students, because it changes what I'm worried about or thinking about, and then I come back to the manuscript refreshed. I haven't taught since 2019, but I hope to go back to it soon, because I do love it.
Great. So Janet,
Lovely.
thank you.
Sorry, we just have two more that just popped up, two more questions,
great.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Katie asks, do you find significant differences in the literary preferences of France as opposed to America? So and that's in context of mainstream press, social media, and novels. And if so, how does this make you feel?
Well, I think France is a very small country, so you see like an established literary community, and a lot of so I think that's challenging for newcomers to break into. But on the other hand, what's hard in France is that they don't have agents here. So it's very challenging, I think, for writers here to get published, because they submit directly to the publishing house. There's no one to negotiate their contracts for them, and that's very challenging. I think in the US and the UK, we're lucky that we do have agents who can help navigate that process, because it can be a tricky process. My publishing contract, I think, was 33 pages, single-spaced, both sides. So that just gives you an idea of how complex it can be, these contracts. So I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky to have an agent's advice. I think we have some wonderful publishers in France, and of course Hachette actually owns the French mother company, Hachette, actually owns a great deal of the publishers in the UK and the US. So you see a lot of the same titles in all three countries, but of course each country has its own taste and its own covers. And I always think it's interesting to see the different covers of books, either the US or the UK, or the US and France, or the UK and France. It's always, I love seeing the different artwork. I'm not sure I've answered your question.
That's great, thank you. And then Florence is asking, could you tell us a little more about your writing process? Do you write sequentially or move around in the story as you write?
I don't think you should listen to me about advice for writing, because I do it the hard way. I wrote this book. If you read this book, you'll see that it's about 10 pages of one story in Paris, and then 10 pages in Montana, 10 pages in Paris, 10 pages in Montana for quite a long time. But I wrote all of the chunks set in Montana, and then all of the chunks set in Paris. And then I had to figure out how to sew them together. And it was a very long, sticky process. And so I wish I had been a little better at just maybe figuring out how to sew them together a lot earlier, because that took years. But I write by hand, because it's too easy if I'm not happy with something that I'm writing on the computer. It's too easy for me to just erase it all and to turn off my computer. But you can't really do that with a notebook. It would take a lot of effort to cross everything out so you can't see it anymore. I mean, you need a Sharpie pen to do that. So I do like to write by hand, and then I enter it into the computer. And I think one thing that I do to help get into writing is I journal a little while. I have my tea in the morning, and then I journal. And so I don't put any pressure on myself. I'm just writing my observations. I'm just writing about what happened the day before, what might happen today. And I'm already comfortable. I'm already in my chair. I might as well just shift to the book I'm working on. And I think that's very, very helpful, because there's a lot of pressure on people to be brilliant all the time. And I personally am not brilliant all the time. And if I thought I had to be, it would be very hard for me to sit in that chair. Well, thank you so much, Carly and Nora. It's been an absolute delight.
Well, thank you for joining us and telling us about the Paris Library. A number of people here this evening will have read it. And if you haven't bought it yet, then do go and buy it. We do have hard copies of it in the library. So as soon as we're open, make sure you get down there and borrow your copy or reserve it. But thank you so much, Janet. And, you know, I wish you luck with the rest of your virtual tour to promote the book, and with sales of the book, and also good luck with your new novel, which we will definitely be looking out for. Okay. And also thank you to the audience for joining us this evening, and thanks so much for your questions. And as I said at the beginning, this is our first Libraries Live event. So, you know, thank you for joining us, and thank you for launching that with us. And then also, I'd very much like to thank Carly Jupp and Carly Foster for all their technical support. And if you have enjoyed this evening, it has been recorded, and we will be putting it on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and listen to any of it, please do, or recommend it to a friend. So thank you very much, and keep safe, everybody, and have a good evening. Bye.